Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Nakrin here with attorney, guest analyst Holly Waltman joining us today. Holly, thank you so much for being with us as always. So Holly, I have a couple of questions that we want to ask you about. First, let's get our viewers up to speed on the latest, legal headlines that we are following. So there are new calls now from state senators for an investigation into District Attorney, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. There are more questions aimed at her prosecution of former President Donald Trump and his allies. And now these lawmakers are considering a committee to investigate her. A special committee would be formed, and that is really what they're discussing, to just basically look into these explosive allegations that Ms. Willis had some sort of inappropriate relationship with Special Prosecutor Nakrin, who she then hired or appointed to help lead the investigation into former President Donald Trump and his allies. First of all, Holly, what is your reaction to that?
So at the core of any district attorney's office is really the essence of transparency. Their goal and their job is to protect the citizens of the jurisdiction they're in and to give them justice, right? To bring to light the truth of alleged crimes that have occurred within the jurisdiction. So this should not be problematic if everything is on the up and up, and it has not been something that she should be worried about, in the sense that without this investigation, we don't know really what's behind the curtain, and has not been forthcoming with us about that. So it shouldn't be problematic as long as she doesn't have anything to hide.
So interesting. Certainly this has kind of taken on a life of its own, would you say, this whole inquiry and the motions surrounding, this alleged affair between Ms. Willis and Mr. Wade. What other fallout could we see from this?
So I think a lot is still left to be found out when we have the hearing. The judge is either going to grant in full this motion, which would fully dismiss the indictment and also disqualify Ms. Willis from prosecuting this case under this indictment, or I think a more likely outcome is going to be some sort of granted in part, denied in part, or possibly denied in full, or asked for additional information from the parties or additional evidence at a hearing in the future. What I think is interesting is we have the date for the hearing. We know when that's going to be scheduled, but we haven't seen the state's response. And I do believe that that was a response that she stated, or her office stated, that was going to be in writing. So I do feel as though an appropriate amount of time has passed since the filing on behalf of co-defendant Roman earlier this month.
So, of course, there would be a response, and ultimately the court would issue, the judge would issue a ruling on this motion to, or it's a two-part motion, to disqualify Ms. Willis and Mr. Wade, or multi-part motion, I should say, to disqualify both Ms. Willis and Mr. Wade from the case, and also to dismiss the charges. So there's so many directions this could go. Can you kind of break that down a little bit? What happens from there, and really how this could lead to delays potentially lasting years?
Yes, certainly. So depending on the outcome of the motion, whether or not we have a definite ruling from the court on the day of the motion when it's heard, or the court also has the option to ask for an additional evidentiary hearing where additional witnesses are called either by the state or by the defense. We also have the option that certain co-defendants in the case could join in the motion if they feel as though it's appropriate for their client. We have to really look at it at a bird's eye view. We have one indictment. We will have one trial if any remaining defendants choose not to resolve their case by a plea or by disposal of the indictment. If they join this motion and it's granted, we have individuals and individual legal teams that have to take into consideration what is in the best interest of their individual client, despite the fact that they are named on an indictment with other people.
Absolutely, an excellent point there. Any other thoughts on kind of, big picture, how this could look with the various delays, the presidential elections upcoming, all of that, and how the timelines could match up or really maybe even interfere with each other?
Well, as we see caucuses and campaigns in politics start to uptick on the race to November, we're going to see even more pressure to make this case move along the timeline that was either originally proposed during the scheduling order or something close to it. I think that it's, if we look at history and we look at the Fulton County cases historically, we have RICO cases that last much, much longer than even a year or two. So the possibility at this juncture that this case does not wrap up in 2024, but rather way later, I believe is a very fair possibility.
So, this is such a layered case, but we've both been following it very closely. So now what we've seen that's very interesting is that we saw that Ms. Willis has been subpoenaed to testify in Mr. Wade's divorce proceedings, and then we saw that she filed a motion to quash that subpoena so that she does not have to testify in the divorce proceedings. And then, we saw that there was an answer from Jocelyn Wade, the estranged wife of Mr. Nathan Wade, that was also had some very interesting revelations, including some bank statements that showed that Mr. Wade had paid for trips that he and Miss Willis had taken together, that sort of thing. I mean, it just seems like it's incredibly distracting, but I don't want to, inject my own opinion into this. That alone, do you think could it have some sort of impact on whether Mr. Wade and Miss Willis are removed from the case?
Well, certainly, Joy. I mean, one of the things that's important to think about in this case, we have a multi-jurisdictional case that spans civil and criminal, right? We have a party or a group of people that are now involved into a civil case. That case was heard earlier this week in a Cobb County court, which is an adjacent county to Fulton County. And again, like I was speaking to earlier, it sort of was not completely answered by the judge. The decision that was given to everybody walking away from that hearing was that Mr. Wade would have to participate in his deposition, and then it was going to be or it would be towards the attorneys to come up and come back to the court with additional information that they seek to gain from Fani Willis's deposition that Nathan Wade would not be able to speak to in his.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. And, we've seen that Miss Willis, in her motion to quash the subpoena, she essentially accused Jocelyn Wade of interfering in her investigation into the former president. Is that valid?
Joy, at this point, Jocelyn Wade has an interest in getting a fair divorce and separating her assets, her family, from her soon-to-be ex-husband, presumably. Whether or not her intention is two-folded or has multi-layers is not really evident right now. Again, if Fani Willis, an elected official, has nothing to hide, then squashing a subpoena really seems a little odd to me.
So ultimately, the judge did grant the motion and essentially, put a stay on it, right? That issued a stay so that essentially it's in effect that she doesn't have to testify for now until, I believe the condition was it would be dependent on Nathan Wade's testimony. So they would kind of hear his testimony and then kind of wait and see. I'm not sure. Did you understand that in that way?
Yeah, Joy, and that's kind of what I'm talking about when we're waiting to hear from the judge in Fulton County on the Trump case regarding co-defendant Roman's motion. Granted in part, denied in part, stayed in part, all of these things are options. And I don't think that we would do our viewers a service if we said it's likely to be granted in full or likely to be denied in full. I think that we're going to see a lot of gray happen and a lot of additional questions that the court or each party may have regarding which way the Trump case goes. But yes, it's my understanding that Fani Willis is not exempt from having to go to her deposition. Of course, it was stayed because it was scheduled for earlier this week, but she is not out of the woods yet, and I would not say that her motion to quash the subpoena has been granted in full.
All right, let's talk about the YSL Rico case because trial has been canceled for today, actually, and it's going to be back in session for tomorrow. But, our viewers have been following it closely because we've been offering gavel-to-gavel coverage on our secondary stream, our special events stream. Here is some file video from inside the courtroom. There you see Jeffrey Williams, a.k.a. Young Thug. And we've still, all this week, been seeing Trontavious Stevens on the stand, and he's been on since more tthan 3 weeks ago, because remember the court was dark for a week and all that. And Trontavious Stevens, he has confessed, well, I shouldn't use the word confess because the defense is going to argue with me there, but essentially he has testified that himself, Trontavious Stevens, and Jeffrey Williams co-founded YSL, and that it is in fact a street gang, a criminal enterprise, and that all 6 defendants in this case, were gang members. And it seems that right now, the defense is obviously trying to pick apart on cross-examination Trontavious Stevens and some of his testimony and so forth. Overall, how do you think that this case is going for each side?
So, of course, this is a very complex matter. We are, if this is probably a second or third quarter type of thing. The state has bounced back and forth between professional witnesses and used to be co-defendants. Mr. Stevens, remember, had to, in order to get himself off of the defense side of the courtroom, sitting right next to Young Thug and the other remaining co-defendants, he had to cut a deal with the state. And part of that deal was that he comes and testifies in a manner that is in accordance with what the state is trying to prove. So, of course, defense counsel is going to try and discredit the believability of his testimony, because he did essentially do anything he had to do to get away from the defense table and to be a remaining co-defendant in this trial.
And I understand that there is a push right now to actually introduce some of the plea deal video, and that there may be some inconsistencies between his testimony during the, basically during the negotiations for the plea deal and his testimony that we've heard in court just in the last few weeks. My understanding, though, is that it's the state who wants to introduce this video. This is from our reporter, Rachel Aragon, who's been inside the courtroom almost every single day of this trial. Would that be strategically to kind of get ahead of these inconsistencies and prevent the defense from using those inconsistencies to impeach Trontavious Stevens?
It's certainly what the state is attempting to do here. Typically when the district attorney, especially in Fulton County, approaches an attorney about their client changing to state's witness and taking a deal in a case to remove themselves from a trial, something called a proffer occurs. Now, if you're in custody, if your client's in custody, that proffer typically occurs in a jail, and it is recorded. If your client is out on bond, it typically happens in an office, a law office, and it is also recorded. And so the state is looking at their jury saying, hey, you need to believe the testimony of this person because it's truthful, because it's sworn to, but they also in the same breath are having to play a tape or requesting to play a tape of the proffer that may have inconsistencies. So if he says the sky is blue in his proffer and he says the sky is green on the stand because he's changed his testimony, not only is his deal in jeopardy, but the state's believability of their witnesses is also going to be called into question by all of the defense attorneys here.
Yeah, so that's why it's so interesting, because Rachel Aragon, like I say, our reporter on the case inside the courtroom, we were discussing this offline. Why would the state introduce that video if it's unfavorable to them? And my answer was, I believe it would be strategically because they want to get ahead of it and essentially try to address any inconsistencies, explain that to the best of their ability, or have the witness explain that, rather than just kind of leave it for low-hanging fruit for the defense to go and attack and use to impeach Trontavious Stevens.
Yeah, certainly. And Joy, this kind of goes to the theme of what we're talking about today. What does delay do to jury trials, right? Mr. Stevens telling a story or a recollection today to us may be different than what he remembers a year from now or a year prior to his proffer. So the state is having to go back and try and salvage either what he has honestly forgot or has been placed pressure upon to change his testimony. Remember, maybe he testified at the proffer from behind bars and tried to give them more than he truly could swear honestly under oath and testified to in order to get away from the defense table in this trial and sitting beside these individuals during this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Thank you so much, Holly. So I want to ask you about one final issue. So this is a new bill that would actually expand the RICO law, and just kind of reiterating for the viewers, both the YSL and the election meddling cases are huge RICO trials. These are racketeer under the racketeering law essentially here in Georgia, and so now there's a bill that would expand the RICO law to include littering and other misdemeanors. The RICO law is essentially is controversial even as it stands right now. So Holly, why is RICO controversial right now? And then how could this kind of make it even more complicated?
Yeah, absolutely. So Joy, when you introduce new legislation on any sort of matter, it is sort of scary or controversial because the way that the words are written in the law are going to be the roadmap that attorneys use on each side to try and make them fit certain cases and certain facts. Fani Willis became very notable when she was an assistant district attorney in Fulton County because she prosecuted teachers under the RICO Act. Prior to that, in Georgia, we had only really seen street gangs, violent groups, people that were accused of different sorts of crimes, if you will, than perhaps teachers that were cheating on tests. So adding new language, adding new deference to a bill could possibly allow for more broad sweeping application of this sort of law. I mean, could fraternities or sororities or other organizations that we otherwise think of as good, positive community groups be used and prosecuted under RICO? I think the answer is yes, possibly, and it all depends on how this bill is drafted and how the words come together inside of it.
Okay, we are just getting so many comments on YouTube. People are wondering if this is politically motivated, and I'm not sure if they're talking about this bill to expand the RICO law, because maybe they're talking about all the topics being politically motivated. But what do you think of that? I mean, what do you think about how politics may play a role, for instance, in the proposal of this bill to expand the RICO law?
Joy, at this point, it's very premature. We are just seeing the initial conversations, the initial drafts, the initial red lines. These sort of bills go through several different edits before they actually go up for votes. So is it possible? Certainly. Do we have a smoking gun that points exactly to that being the purpose for putting this forward? No. On the flip side of that, I would say something like this. Georgia, because of what has happened in the past, has a genuine interest in election integrity and in campaign integrity, right? Mm-hmm. So some of those things, while they seemed a little shocking, like, oh, you could be indicted under RICO for littering, I think they're almost, at this point, trying to be strategic on how we protect election campaigns or influence on the grassroots or on the basic level of something as simple as walking around a neighborhood passing out a political pamphlet for a campaign.
Wow, this conversation here on YouTube is getting very, very heated. I mean, especially when we're talking about the Trump investigation and really what is being uncovered here with Fani Willis and Nathan Wade and everything. Any final thoughts on that topic? Because that's what our viewers are talking about.
This has been a polarizing case. I don't think that there are very few people that don't have some sort of strong opinion about it one way or the other. I think we can all agree that we, as a community and as a society, want to have the utmost confidence in our elected officials. That, I think, is universal. That, I think, is what is going to be revealed here under a microscope with the district attorney's office and what they've done with funds and appointments and those sort of things. So we are very much in the beginning of this, even though it seems as though we've talked about it for a long time. The conversation's going nowhere at this point.
Okay. Hey, Holly, so if our viewers, if anyone in our audience wants to hire you, what kind of law, what kind of cases do you do, and how can people reach you?
Yeah, so I own a criminal defense law firm based in Georgia. We have offices in the metro Atlanta area, and we service our clients all over the state in state, superior, and federal court offenses, specializing in complex felonies. We can be found on social media, on Instagram and Facebook at The Waltman Firm, and our website is thewaltmanfirm.com.
Well, thank you so much, Attorney Holly Waltman, for joining us with your expertise and analysis. All right, everybody, we hope you have a great day. Keep it here on Atlanta News First Plus.